Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Kathy Wright, and I am Boost Manager of Strategic Contracting and Procurement. Welcome to today's seminar, Pricing Competitive in the Current Environment. Our presenters for today are Megan Hand and Catherine Fredland. Megan is a senior contracts and pricing consultant with Boost and helps our clients with proposal pricing volumes, including fair and reasonable price analysis, wrap rate development, and overall proposal compliance. She also does all things contracts, from redlining and negotiating NDAs, teaming agreements, and subcontracts, along with everything else that happens in a day-to-day contract shop. Catherine is a seasoned financial and contracts executive with over a decade of experience in government contracting, accounting, and business operations. She specializes in budgeting, forecasting, proposal pricing, audit management, and regulatory compliance, including FAR, CAS, and DCAA. Catherine has led cross-functional teams and collaborates closely with leadership to drive strategic planning, process improvement, and operational efficiency. The presentation portion of today's event will last around 40 minutes, and we will conclude with a question and answer session for the last 15 minutes. Please use the Zoom questions feature to send me your questions as they come up, and I'll pass them to our presenters at the end. This is one of 4 webinars the Boost team is presenting this month. When they conclude, we'll make all 4 presentations available through Boost's website at boostllc.net. We know you're going to enjoy this session, so let's get started. Over to you, Megan and Catherine.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for that warm introduction. And thank you all for being here with us today. We're going to start by talking about the current competitive landscape, discuss indirect rates, go on with escalation, some resources you can use, and then taking everything we have learned today to discuss how we can independently assess our solicitations. We'll end with key takeaways and questions. Next slide, please. The current competitive landscape. So why are we here today? What has changed? As many of you, I'm sure, are aware, there has been a shift in the competitive landscape, a lot which has been driven by executive orders. There has been almost 150 executive orders this year alone, and these show us the trends with the government, what are their priorities and goals. I have just pulled 2 on the slide, although many have to deal with government contracting, but these 2, the ensuring commercial cost-effective solutions in federal contracts and eliminating waste and saving taxpayer dollars by consolidating procurement, both show a very specific trend in government funding and spending. The government wants to eliminate unnecessary and imprudent expenditures, provide more cost-effective solutions, and eliminate waste and duplications of efforts. Next slide, please. There has also been a shift in government spending. This slide is a trend in government spending pulled from GSA for different service areas. We have F&C, which is facilities and construction, T&L, that's transportation and labor services. We have IT, of course, and then IPS is industrial products and services. Although the third quarter of FY25 hasn't ended yet, you can just tell from the second quarter that government spending has been lower than it was in the previous year and years beyond that. So this, coupled with executive orders, is showing us that there is a focus on cost and price. If this hasn't been a priority in your solicitations before, it needs to be a focus now. Next slide, please. And now I'll hand it over to my co-host, Catherine.
Thank you, Megan. Next slide, please. Understanding your indirect rate structure starts with knowing what's in your cost pools. It's important that you ask these questions when you're considering your indirect rates. Benchmarking your rates against industry standards helps identify whether you're aligned with peers or carrying inefficiencies that inflate your rates. It's also important to remember that indirect rates shouldn't be static. You should be adjusting them for each proposal, allowing you to better reflect actual cost expectations and to stay competitive. Forecasting the impact of new contract wins is another key element. Each award can shift your rate structure significantly, especially if it introduces a large volume of direct cost or underutilized overhead. Finally, analyzing how individual programs affect your indirect rates allows you to identify which efforts are driving costs disproportionately, so you can course correct and adjust pricing or manage internal resources more effectively. Next slide, please. When it comes to pricing competitively, indirect rates can make or break your proposal strategy. Here are 3 key actions every contractor can take to manage their rates more effectively. Review the competition. Are you aligned with what competitors are offering? Are you over or underpricing yourself? This helps ensure bidding smartly without sacrificing profitability. It's especially important in tightly congested solicitations that you're reviewing the competitive landscape. Analyzing your current rates. Next, are you taking a look at your own rates? Frequent reviews help catch inefficiencies that your cost allocations and reveal where you might be out of balance. An internal audit can improve your bottom line and your pricing posture. And then forecasting out. Don't just focus on where your rates are today, but look ahead. Not only looking ahead with your same competitive landscape, but looking at what an anticipation of winning a contract might impact you. How does this award impact your indirect rates? Having solid projections allow you to adjust early and maintain control of your pricing strategy as your business grows and shifts. Next slide, please.
I'm going to step in and interrupt you for a moment, Catherine. It's time for our first polling question. So I'm going to launch this now. When going after a new effort, when do you typically look at pricing? Is it something you do right away as a priority, or after you have the other volumes developed a little bit more? Is it the last thing you look at, or do you have bid rates that you sort of just plug and chug and move on? And the answers are coming in. And so far, it's neck and neck, but moving out. Yes, it looks like most of you do it right away as a priority. And then second to that, after the other volumes are developed a little bit more, you probably have an idea of price, but as you shape up how you respond to the SOW and you pull your past performance together and probably develop more market intel, you may adjust those rates as you go. Almost none of you, 4% have bid rates that you usually use, and only 9% save it till the very end. So thank you for participating, everyone. I'm gonna change the slide and turn it back over to the team.
Thank you, Kathy. So revisiting the subject of reviewing the competition and analyzing your current rates, there are tools out there that can help you look at what an average indirect rate would be in the industry. So we provided an example here of a gauge report that has the average indirect rate for GovCon over the last 7 years. I'll give a moment for you to look at this before we shift to the next slide. Okay, Kathy, go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So on this slide, this is a breakout, same information, but we're going to provide these in a wrap rate perspective. And you can see there's a notable decrease in both company site and customer site from 23 to 24. So leveraging reports and information like this to benchmark your internal rates is an extremely effective way to strengthen your proposal strategy. Next slide, please. What we've done here is show some examples of how small adjustments to your cost pools can result in significant impacts to your wrap rates. Now, just notate these are an example. Understanding how your own cost pools are structured is essential to assess how similar adjustments would affect your specific indirect rates. In the first example, we have a 1.75 wrap rate with a 34% fringe, 10% overhead, 3% in material and handling, and 15% G&A. If we manipulated just the fringe and reduced it by 5%, it results in an overall reduction of the wrap rate by 7%. So reducing the rate in this exact example of an indirect build to 29% would give you a 1.68% wrap rate. Moving over, I'm we've reflected what a 5% reduction in overhead. So we return that fringe rate to 34% and we reduce the overhead by 5%. And that results again in an 8% reduction in your wrap rate at a 1.67. So understanding how you can manipulate things and what your wrap rate consists of and how your cost pools are calculated gives you a lot of tools to be able to analyze and posture yourself when it comes to proposing your new rates. Next slide, please. This is just go back one. Okay, this just takes another look at it where we've reduced G&A by 5% and we've removed the material and handling fee and where we get a reduction there. So again, there are ways to manipulate your wrap rates and adjust them by making small adjustments to your individual cost pools. If your rates are significantly higher or even unusually low, it's worth digging into the why. That's somewhere Boost can be a valuable partner, and we would love to talk about you more if you've got questions. Next slide, please, Kathy. All right, I'll hand this back over to Megan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. So now we'll talk a little bit about escalation. Next slide, please. So what is escalation? Why is it important? And how do you determine it? The first thing I want to note is escalation is not the same as inflation. Inflation is what you see when you go to the grocery store, at least I've been seeing, and you buy the same things and it's $20, $30 more than it was the week before. That's inflation. Escalation is very specific to certain goods and services, so you might see escalation differ amongst goods and services, and takes into account not only inflation, but other areas such as environmental impacts, supply and demand, technology changes, and political shifts. Next slide, please. Okay. So let's look at where we can find escalation. So escalation, one of the most common areas or common websites you can find what it is using the Employment Cost Index, the ECI. This is done by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and updated on a quarterly basis. This chart I thought would be important to see because you can see the trend for escalation over the last 20 years on a 3-month average. I mentioned that it's 3 months because you might be looking at it, see that it caps out at about 1.5% and think, oh no, it was a lot higher a couple of years ago. Yes, it was. You can see in the chart from 2022, 2023, it was at about 5%. And now it's finally coming down, whereas the last average, so that was in March of 2025, we are at about 3.5% for wages and salaries. So this is going down. I do want to mention this is just one index you can use. There are several others out there, but it's one of the more common ones for government contracting. Next slide, please. One of the big key areas is escalation is not universal. It's not something where you can think, yeah, I've been using escalation the same 2% for the last 10 years, no matter my service area, because that's not accurate. Here I pulled in 2 different escalation rates from 2 different NAICS codes. So we have construction under NAICS 23, and then the professional, scientific, and technical services under NAICS 54. Highlighted in the orange box, you can see the difference in escalation for wages and salaries for the last year. If you take a look in, let's say, the second quarter of 2024, that's a 2.7 versus 4% difference. Now you might think, well, that's not really that big of a difference, right? 1.3% from there. But if you were to do a bid, $10 million a year over 5 years, that equates to about $1.5 million difference. That could pay for higher salaries that your people need or help with your profitability. So really taking a look at escalation, focusing on how it could be specific to your procurement is something you can do to make sure you are pricing effectively. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Megan. And it's time for another poll. The next question is, who on your team leads the pricing effort? Is this management or BD? Do you have a pricing team of your own that just tackles the pricing? Do you outsource when you need, or is it all hands on deck? Some of the smaller businesses, it is total collaboration throughout the company. And we'll just pause a minute as the results are coming in. Well, this one's closer than I thought it would be. So 44%, or almost half of you, say someone in management or BD does it. The second highest is all hands on deck. Everybody gets to participate when it's time for pricing. And about 50-50, at 15% apiece, people have their own pricing team or they outsource when it's needed. Very interesting. Thank you for the participation. Back over to you, Megan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. And that is really interesting on here. Okay, so now we're going to go a little bit into resources. And the great thing about the resources I'm going to go into is they're all free. Everyone loves free. So the first one is BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We just saw how it could help you with escalation, but it has other tools as well. So in the top right, you can see some of the data tools. For example, it could help you with wages, and it gives you some specific insights on these NAICS code areas. So I took a snippet on the bottom right for the professional, scientific, and technical services. So you can see workplace trends, productivity, and other measures. I do want to know a couple of things here. All of these tools are averages. So you want to see where maybe you compare, but if you're really trying to figure out where you fit in the market or for a specific solicitation, I always advise to get some professional assistance with that, as they truly know what's happening. BLS is also very interesting and useful because it's what some of the larger, let's say Max or RDIQs use, like Oasis Plus. They use the labor rates from BLS data. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite tools, USA Spending. And I know Kathy and some of my team have heard me talk about this beforehand. And I swear I don't get paid to talk about this. But USA Spending pulls in data from FPDS. If you're not familiar with FPDS, that's the Federal Procurement Data System, and it pulls in the data from every single modification and contract from government contracts, at least the ones required, which is the majority of them. It can give you insights on how much a mod was, what was the cost of the mod, what was it based off of, the timing of it, some competition details as well. The thing about USA Spending is if you're not familiar with FPDS, which is a system from about 20 years ago that looks like it's from 20 years ago, this one gives you a little bit more ability to enter in keywords, phrases you can search. So on the left, I have a snippet on how you can search. For example, you can enter in a contract number under keywords. You could search even by agency to see, let's see how agency spending has been, some other details giving you an idea about competition and also about how you've been performing. If maybe you don't have the best resources in history of what actually have my contracts been looking at. If you were to go into a specific contract, you can actually, and this you can see on the top right snippet, you can get a layout of every single modification there is, what the price of the modification was, and a brief summary on the modification. So this can help you see things like what was the option year one amount for? How many modifications have they done? Have they deobligated funds recently, maybe due to executive orders, and other details. There's also some details on competition that I find incredibly useful. So let's say you're going for a new contract, you get the incumbent information, you could look up the incumbent contract and see, oh wow, this was sole source before. So the competition is new for them. This might mean prices are going to lower because in a sole source environment, someone might have bid a little bit higher than they needed to. Next slide, please. And then another common one that's been used is the GSA.gov pricing tool, sometimes referred to as GSA Calc. And as we get into more GSA pricing and solicitations, which one of our future webinars does touch upon, so hopefully you join us for that one, you can start seeing what are the rates from other vendors that have a mass schedule. In this example, we searched software engineer, pretty common labor category. We looked up things like they need a bachelor's degree, somewhere between 0 to 5 years of experience. And we can see that $150 is about the average for a software engineer. So as you're looking at your rates, as you're looking at what competition might have, this can give you a general idea of where you need to be. Next slide, please.
It is time for our third polling question. I'm going to like this one. With respect to pricing, where do you struggle the most? Do you worry about proposal compliance? Are you worried, are you going to be competitive enough? Are you trying to figure out where can I get good data or fresh data or the most fresh data or all of the above? Do all these things factor into your worry beads over pricing? Oh my goodness. And by far, strategizing on how we can be competitive is the most popular answer. That's 63% of you. And with about 30% of you saying, yes, all of this is a factor in my pricing. Wow, that is great feedback. Thank you all for participating in the poll. Megan, back over to you.
Perfect. And that's interesting. Although when we do review solicitations, I will say I focus on everything because really everything is important. But as we're talking about, and it seems like everyone was concerned with, how can I strategize to be most cost effective? This is what this last area focuses on, independently assessing solicitations, so you can be the most competitive. What we first recommend is taking a holistic approach, and a holistic approach to the individual solicitation, right? Looking at the competition. Is this a sole source procurement? How competitive was this effort historically? And this, I think, will be even more important as we go on because we expect that there will be a lot of efforts that are moving to, let's say, GSA Mass or Oasis Plus, where maybe they haven't been there before. You might be looking at how many questions were asked in the Q&A. That always gives you an idea of competition. What is the set aside, if any, which can help you determine how many people can bid on this. You also want to focus on the contract and acquisition type. And specifically, does the requirement work for the contract type? A lot of times it might not. You might be trying to fit, a round peg in a square hole, something like that, and it just doesn't work. So when that happens, what questions can you ask to help mitigate your risk? Are there any unallowable costs? How should you forecast your indirect rates? So something we're following on about what Catherine discussed. And then we want to take a look at the agency and industry. Is this for cutting edge and innovative work? Is this an agency projected to have a higher budget in the future? Or maybe their price sensitivity isn't as much? And what is really that sensitivity? Do we have any historical knowledge on it of where they might have accepted higher prices for a higher value, technical value in the past? Next slide, please. Let's start with seeing who is your competition. So I want to begin with saying sole source and sole bid. So sole bid is where you are expected to be the only one that's actually bidding on an effort, should be treated differently and can help offset competitive environments. So knowing if you're the only one there really should be looking at pricing differently. So that you can be a little bit maybe higher in sole source. And then when you have a lot of competition, price as low as you can. And when competitive, not only do you want to know, well, how many competitors are there, but we need to also approach the situation of how could the competitors approach this differently than us? Are they known to underbid? Is one of those competitors one of those proposal shops where they're putting out 30 procurement a month? They're not as focused with the technical and management, but their whole goal is let's bid as low as possible. Are they familiar with the customer? Have they put out job postings for the requirement? And I add this one in because sometimes by job postings, you can see if they have salaries that are lower than what you're thinking should be the ones, or maybe even they're expecting it to be a lower level person performing the work. You think it needs a senior engineer and they have a mid-level engineer out. So what is your competition doing? And then also, what type of companies is the solicitation restricted to? Is this a set aside? Is it not? Is it a multiple award IDIQ where there's only a group of 4 or 5 people being able to bid? It's important to know things such as, yes, this is full and open, which means large businesses who might have other contracts to offset some of their costs are bidding, because historically large businesses can sometimes bid a little bit lower than some small businesses where this is their only contract they have. And something I highlighted is the incumbency advantage does not always warrant a higher price. So as you're thinking about your competition, or maybe you yourself are the incumbent, note that that's not always saying, doesn't matter who else is there, I'm an incumbent, I'll probably win. I think that's one of the downfalls I see time and time again, especially as sometimes evaluation criteria change and maybe past performance isn't as important, or even technical capabilities. Next slide, please. Contract and acquisition types. So before I get into this a little bit, I will note, if you want to learn more about contract types, I did do a blog on this a couple months back, so you can see this under the Boost website. I'm just going to jump into this higher level. So contract type matters. I cannot tell you how often I talk to someone about pricing and say, okay, but the contract type is fixed price. And they look at me and go, oh, it is? Because they would honestly build it up the same way as they would a T&M or a cost type. I go, yes, it is. Because riskier contract types, like fixed price, generally warrant a higher profit and fee with it. Also, the contract type can help restrict how you execute and could prevent certain additional profitability. For example, on here, you might have a cost plus contract that makes certain costs unallowable. In that scenario, you can only reclaim maybe your ODCs, but you're not allowed to burden it with your G&A. Maybe your ODCs, you're not allowed to have fee or profit on them. Whereas in your fixed price, if you gave one amount, you could have done it all. So knowing the contract type is incredibly important. Also with fixed price, one of the interesting things is you can sometimes make up profit. So if you're thinking, okay, well, I'm proposing 1880 hours, but sometimes my people only work 1872, so that extra 8 hours could be my profit. Well, that's not going to work for a cost type contract, but it could work for a fixed price. So really knowing the contract type matters. The second thing, take a look at is the acquisition method. So you have a scale, there's usually a scale on here, one side being LPTA, that's lowest price technically acceptable. The other area is usually the best value trade-off, right? And in LPTA, which we expect there to be more of in this more cost-effective environment, you need to put your best foot forward first. Don't expect that you will get an evaluation notice, sometimes referred to as an EN, that states, hey, can you lower your price a little bit? You probably won't get that as much with an LPTA effort as you might with a best value trade-off. And even in a best value trade-off, where you might have a higher price than a competitor and be successful with it, it truly depends on the evaluation criteria, how it's written, and as we'll discuss in a couple slides, what is your agency and industry? Another thing that I do expect we might see some more is the HTRO method. If you all are not familiar with this is the most highly technical rated offer. So this is where the government says, okay, give us your most highly technical rated proposals, and whoever's the most highly technical rated, they determine they're fair and reasonable, and then they can have awarded to them. So looking at that, the way you would approach pricing would be different than in, let's say, an LPTA. An example of HTRO, if any of you were on it, was the Legacy Oasis contract. Next slide, please. I always love to give examples. So here's an example of the importance of contract type. Now, of course, this is very simple. Let's assume we have cost is $100 an hour. Maybe it's a flat software engineer. And we expect this to be 50 hours worth of work based upon the requirements. So we propose $5,000 and our profit, let's say we just say 10%, $500. This is for easy math. So a total of $5,500. But now execution happens. Escalation was higher than we thought it was going to be because we didn't look really at what the industry was saying. And our indirect rates, we didn't forecast them, and now they're higher. So our rate is now $110 an hour. And of course, because this happens a lot, our requirements were not well defined. And so we ended up needing 10 more hours to do what the government wanted us to do. So our real cost is about $6,600. That's what we incurred. So what's the difference between the two? In a fixed price environment, it's fixed. It's $5,500. We spent $6,600. We take a loss on that of over $1,000. In a cost plus environment, alternatively, it was fine. We told the government we were at the top of our funds, and they said, no, it's fine. We'll add in a couple $100 more. They don't always do that, but it could happen. So we spent 60 hours, $110 an hour, $6,600, and we were still able to claim our $500 fee. So you can just see the drastic difference in the contract type, which would help tell you how you should approach a solicitation. Next slide, please. Agencies and industries. This is especially going to be important as more vendors are approaching different agencies and different industries, trying to align with the shift in the environment. Not all of them operate the same. The one I'm going to always call out the most is the intelligence community and DoD, which tends to warrant higher prices. This is in part from things like your clearance levels, and also just because the pool of people in there is smaller. And I can say this as a former, IC contracting officer, we thought we were unicorns, and we expected prices to be higher. You also have budgets that are decreasing for some agencies and not for others. So here's a simple trend from 3 different agencies. We're looking at the Department of Defense to the left, and you can see out of the 3 I pulled, they are the only one that has had a higher budget in FY25. The Social Security Administration, theirs is significantly lower than it has been in the last 5 years. Department of Commerce, they were very low 5 years ago, just getting started, and now they're on a very big downward trend. So knowing where your agency stands also can help you understand, are they looking for a very cost-effective solution? Do they maybe have some money to spend, to kind of throw around a little bit? Next slide, please. Another way I like to look at this price sensitivity is some sample GAO rulings. So I have 2 here. The first one is between PAI and Cervelo. This was for Marines acquisition. And what happened is the Marines awarded to Cervelo at $15.5 million, almost 40% above what PAI proposed. So PAI said, that's really high. That shouldn't warrant the outstanding technical versus our acceptable when we had a higher, very relevant past performance. GAO said, no, we agree with the government. 40% higher price is acceptable here. It's actually worth the value of an outstanding technical. Again, this is for the Marines looking at like DoD realm. Alternatively, below, I have something from DHHS where something similar happened, but a little bit the opposite here. So we have Cogent. They had a $30.6 million bid, and they had some lower areas, right? Some of their experience was just some confidence versus high confidence. The higher bid was $37 million. So you're talking about a 20% difference on here. The government, though, awarded it to the lower bid, saying that higher confidence was not worth that 20% difference. And again, this is DHHS, and GAO agreed with the government here. So you can just see that price sensitivity amongst different agencies. Okay, next slide, please. So taking everything together, what are some considerations we have? Have you responded to the RFI to your advantage? So knowing a bit more about competition, different contract types, acquisition methods. Are you asking the right questions in the RFI? Are you suggesting certain contract vehicles that maybe limit competition? During the solicitation phase, are you asking strategic questions that could benefit your approach? This might be something of, I know government, you said this should be fixed price, but there's ODCs and travel that are really hard to determine how much they are. Could we have a separate line item and not to exceed for these? And that could help mitigate your risk. Have you adjusted your rates for the specific contract type and contractual requirements? And this is incredibly important here. If the contract is saying something is unallowable, Are you making sure that you're making it up in your rates? Are you making sure your, let's say, your indirect rates are forecasted out to take into consideration that your requirement now is for an additional 50 FTEs, maybe doubling the size of your business? And in general, do you have someone on your team with the pricing and contract expertise needed to approach these? This is where professionals like Boost are handy to come in because they can look at things from a holistic perspective. We know everyone has wonderful BD people, leadership that all have the great focus. Pricing is something completely different. And it's truly to your advantage to talk to someone that can help you understand what your accounting structure says, what the solicitation says, and your left and right limits. Next slide, please.
Okay, key takeaways for today. Um, Indirect rates should change if that's going to help move the needle for you in a competitive environment. And I think it's often overlooked as a lever that can be pulled. Um, Escalation is decreasing. We've been in an environment for the past several years, I think since COVID, where we've seen escalation coming up and up, but now it's trending in the other direction. I think that's a really important piece of information for pricing in this new normal that we're experiencing under the new White House administration. And look at your pricing solicitation over solicitation. I think you should challenge yourself, right? If you have those rate tables and you just go to those and layer on your indirects and layer on a fee and crank it out, maybe it's time to take a step back and revisit that strategy and maybe put some of these practices that the team has talked about today in effect. So for questions and answers, we do have some questions for the team today. I think, Megan, I think this first one is going to be for you. With the hyper-competitive environment we're expecting in the upcoming government fiscal year, do you think the government's going to limit the number of proposals it accepts? And if not, how are they going to navigate evaluating large numbers of inputs from industry and from sellers that they maybe haven't seen before?
And that's a great question, Kathy. I think there's going to be a couple of things that occur. One, I think we're going to see an increase in LPTA procurements, where the government's going to say, we're going to evaluate just the lowest price offer first. And if their price looks reasonable on here, we're going to check their technical, see if it actually is acceptable. And if that's the case, they're going to be the successful bidder. We're not even going to look at anyone else's offers. Another thing I also expect we might see is having more tiered procurements, where maybe we're going to start doing, let's say, service disabled veteran-owned small businesses first, take everything from there, and only if we don't get enough from then maybe we'll go to veteran-owned small business and then maybe small businesses. So we could start eliminating it that way. We can also do certain phases. So we've been seeing that a little bit more now too, as phase procurements, where the first phase is going to eliminate a significant amount of proposals because it's only going to take maybe those with the most highly technical rated. And in that scenario, then the government's going to look at cost and pricing or something else. They're not going to look at every proposal across the board right away. Because we do expect there could be some where there's going to be a few dozen solicitations and bids for that. And that's not going to be fun for the government at all.
No, no, that tiered approach you mentioned in the middle, I find that really interesting because that is a way for the government to cut down on the volume of proposals incrementally, but they're still like they can tackle their small business goals as well, all at the same time.
Exactly. Honestly, it's a win-win when you have those tiered procurements because they don't have to resolicit if there isn't that competition they were expecting either.
Just
And they don't have to open up other proposals if they have enough in one of the tiered levels.
that's awesome. The next question that I have is for Catherine. Catherine, I think this is yours. Is there a way to count for fee or G&A dilution in my bid price when the ODC cleanse have really high funding Since most prime contracts don't allow G&A or fee on ODC spend, like for my or the person who asked the question, they have an unaudited accounting system.
That is a great question, and definitely a question that we see often. While you can't bill G&A or fee directly to ODCs if the contract doesn't allow it, you can structure your rates and proposal pricing to absorb the impact. It turns into a balancing act between remaining compliant and ensuring you don't under recover indirect costs and profit. Some ways you can do that: adjust your fee and G&A rates on other CLINs. It If you might consider increasing your G&A rate on your direct labor CLINs to recover your target G&A base across a smaller pool, you could use a composite or weighted wrap rate, which is definitely more involved than to maybe discuss in this environment, but we could elaborate on that if someone requested. And even establish an internal G&A allocation for ODC management. If the client won't allow G&A and ODCs, and you do still incur costs to manage ODCs. So you can allocate a portion of your G&A burden to those ODC activities for rate development purposes, even if not billed externally. And this would support your rationale for higher G&A elsewhere. So there are definitely some areas which you can consider and balance those rates and structures in your proposal pricing, but it's worth considering the impact and what that looks like across the entire proposal pricing effort, and taking that on a case-by-case basis.
Megan, I saw you come off mute. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just from a contractual perspective, this is also an area, and I love everything Catherine said, that it's okay to ask a question in the solicitation phase to see if the government's willing to change any of those unallowable costs. Honestly, sometimes the government's taking a proposal, rinsing it, repeating it, and doesn't recognize that it is an allowable cost under FAR Part 31, that you can burden ODCs, and they haven't necessarily considered that that should be changed. So writing in a question that says something like, due to the high volume of ODCs, the risk it has, and the amount of effort it takes to actually manage these, would the government consider this? And you can always try that.
I love that. I love that.
Great
And
suggestion, Megan.
yeah, yeah. And Catherine, if I understood your method, the first method you mentioned, it's a tweak among CLINs, right? It wouldn't change your overall total proposed price.
Right.
You would just make adjustments in the CLINs where you can collect G&A.
Correct.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, I have another one, Megan. I think this one is primarily for you. If I price a proposal and submit it with language inside that makes me hold my prices firm for 120 days, but then a few days after I submit it, the government sets a new tariff or increases an old tariff that impacts my pricing, how can I change those prices, or can I change those prices?
Oh, and that's a great question. I'm going to approach this from different angles on here. One, if you have a proposal, and this goes not just for tariffs, but other things that could change your rates, always put in certain assumptions if you're allowed to. You know, you could put in this price is assuming XYZ happens. If this weren't to happen, we would like this. There are things such as economic price adjustments in the government contracts realm, and this also could depend on your contract type. For example, there are fixed price contract types with economic price adjustments that would allow for changes when things such as tariffs might increase, or even if you have, let's say, certain metals where the cost goes so greatly up. If the government's not using those contract types, request that those be used on here. And then, of course, you're going to have to review each contract separately, because sometimes, unfortunately, you might be in a position where you signed up for it. The clauses that might allow for you to have that adjustment aren't in there, and the government's going to push back on it. You can always try to ask for an equitable adjustment on here. It doesn't always work, though. So this is where you really need to make sure you're looking at it from the full life cycle, from the solicitation, getting an idea of your contract type, putting in the correct assumptions, asking those questions, looking at your risk, and then making sure your contract will actually take into account some of these indicators that might greatly impact your price.
I understand. What if I'm just talking about the news headlines, right, over the past 60 or 90 days. What if the government doesn't see it coming either? So we all submit our proposals and we're in the evaluation phase, and then boom, the tariff hits. Can a contractor refuse the award and say, no, I'm not right? If I can't get an adjustment, I will lose money. I'm not going to sign it. Is that an option? And if not, if you do that, what is the outcome? Is there a black mark on the record of the contractor? How does that work?
No, and that's a great question. And this, again, is also going to be very agency specific on here. Working with your contracting officer is going to be key. And this, I'm going to also add in, depends on whether or not we're in like a sole source environment where you might be able to have the ability to talk to your contracting officer versus a competitive environment. We have seen, and I'm going to bring up COVID as an example, because COVID came up, was completely unexpected, and drove up some costs incredibly so. In that scenario, the government did open it up for some adjustments to prices across the board, depending on the contract type, industry, and agency on here. DoD did that a little bit on there, and there was an allowability that there wasn't necessarily before. So you can request sometimes an equitable adjustment on here, an EPA, equitable, price adjustment on there. But again, it's really going to depend on also what your relationship with the CO is, what they have habitually done. Because I've met some contracting officers who just won't do anything because they say you should have predicted certain things, even if you can't. Because unfortunately, things change all the time. That was what we saw a lot with the escalation increasing to 5%. There were so many contractors that were stuck with the 2% escalation because that's what it was 3 years ago and didn't have a lot of ability to change. I have had success in those sort of scenarios, requesting changes to the contracting officer, stating why, stating our assumptions. And this is, again, making sure your assumptions are well-rounded in your proposal phase. So you can say really what you are basing your pricing on and saying, well, look, it changed, our assumptions changed, and therefore our price has to change. It doesn't always happen. It's not so clear cut. This is a scenario I'd expect that you should come to a professional to really see what's happening.
Yes, I agree. And I also agree with your agency by agency approach. Sometimes it just depends on the maturity and how well seasoned your contracting officer
Mhm.
is, right? I mean, there's a realization that in the COVID example that you gave, if real escalation is 5% and you only have two, and you're not willing to pay the federal government to do the work, then you end up with the lowest quality employees because your higher quality employees will leave and go to other companies.
Yeah.
So I just think I think it is a case by case, but a very interesting scenario.
Yeah, definitely. And that like that scenario, I do know some vendors who are able to negotiate with the government just a termination for convenience. They tried to make it not a default because the default would be where that black mark is that's
Yeah.
on your records of saying I can't actually staff. But the government was a little bit more understanding and said, okay, let's maybe not exercise your option, or we're going to just terminate for convenience on here because we understand things are so different at this area.
Yeah, and those are good. Nobody wants a termination, but a T for C is a good solution when your only other option might be default or really bad
Mhm.
CPARs, right?
Exactly. That could impact your future bids where they can look at your records.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's all the questions that we have for today. Um, thank you, Megan and Catherine. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate the time that you put in, and I think there was a ton of knowledge in there for our audience. For our listeners, if you have additional questions, please reach out to us. Just send us an email and we will answer those questions for you. We appreciate everyone coming and attending today, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow at our next webinar, The Great Contraction Cutting Costs. Have a wonderful afternoon.